And what's interesting is that this actually does kind of connect to the big topic I wanted to talk about today, which is a very interesting conversation I had with my dad over the weekend. And the thing that came up was I had sent my dad a copy of draft two of my book. Uh, and I say draft two because draft two is a big enough read write that I figured like let me just go ahead and send him this version. Like I could have sent him draft one. Like it's not that one was terrible or anything, but draft two is going to be a lot better. Um, so and also draft two is still in progress. Like by the time I sent it to him, it was only like up to chapter 8 out of I think the new outline is 30 chapters in total. So and it's funny actually even that is sort of its own sort of odd funny story because it was on Easter. I was hanging out with him on Easter, and at one point he turns to me and he says, "There's probably a nice way to say this, but what's the point of your book?" And I knew what he meant, right? Like what is the goal? Why am I telling this story? Because he knew what the book is about, right? We've talked about that quite a bit. And it's a fair question because like I'm writing about a pretty sensitive story. Like the main thrust of the book is how I lost my mom to alcoholism. Um, and that's his wife, right? Like this is not I only have the two parents, just to be clear. I know some families are different. Um, but yeah, so like understandably, right? He is has had some trepidation about that story being told. But um but by that same token, he's always been very supportive of me and very supportive of my writing. And uh it's interesting because like when he asked, I knew it wasn't coming from a place of like, why are you doing this? It was more the sort of question under the question was, um, how does this serve you? Right? Like, how is this like are you sure this is something you want to do? Right? Like something you want to commit to. Um, which is funny because by that point I was already like starting to work on draft two. So I told him like, look, I'll send you what I have so far, and you can on the next draft, and you can see for yourself, right? Um, which I think is its own thing that is a core discipline for any creative that is you know important to develop is like it is always there's always the temptation to like stand aside from your work and explain it and tell people why you're doing things a certain way and be like, well, da, da, da. And there's a time and a place for that, right? I won't say that's never useful. In fact, like I'm the guy that will actually read plaques when I go to the museum. I'll read the plaque next to the painting because a lot of times there's really interesting stuff in there, and it does deepen my appreciation of the painting. And like I've had short stories published where they let me do a little side essay where I explain my thought process behind the story and the inspiration behind it and all that. And I love writing those, right? I always, anytime I get a chance, I include something like that too. But ultimately, the ultimate test is, can you put the work in front of someone without any commentary on your part and they get it, right? Which is, I think, one of the hardest things to do in the beginning, right? And honestly, I think there is always a measure of stage fright that comes with that. And I use that term specifically because in my time as an actor, I learned that stage fright is just a form of energy, right? And it's there to help you so long as you understand it and can harness it. People who are not trained as actors or just public speakers, the reason why they get locked up and their stage fright causes them to trip over their words and whatnot is because they're misinterpreting that energy. That energy, like something is at stake when you step on stage. There are people who are giving you their time and attention, and that matters. That does carry real weight. And so the objective is not to deny that fact or run away from it, but embrace it. Like, okay, great, awesome. These people are listening. They care. They're actually making the time to be here in this room and listen to what I have to say. How can I honor that? Right. Same applies for writing, by the way. Same applies for any kind of, written content anywhere. And that's the ultimate test, right? Is like when you just put it in front of someone and just see what happens. And so the funny thing is, and the thing with books in particular is that I've learned is, or short stories for that matter, right? Especially if it's like on the longer end, is I put zero pressure on people to read it in a certain time frame, right? I recognize that as it's one thing if I'm like hiring an editor, right? Because that's actually like a service I'm buying. Exactly, genuine interactions are the best. But if I'm just sharing something with a friend or a peer, I say, "Hey, here you go. Let me know what you think." And I leave it. I never put any. I never come back and be, "Did you read it yet? Did you read it yet? Like when can I expect a response?" Because they're doing a favor, right? Like, um, and like unless it's holding up some other part of the process, which for me, it's generally not. I think also part of it is that I tend to attract people that are fast readers and responders anyway, so that does help. But ultimately, I respect the fact that anyone reading my work in advance is doing me a favor, right? That's a very generous thing for them to do. So I'm not going to put extra pressure on it, just to satisfy my needs. So I sent off the manuscript in progress to my dad, left it alone, and then it's like I said, that was like a day or two after Easter. Fast forward to this weekend, my dad and I met up, went out to a local brewery, and as we're having our beers, at one point he turns to me and says, "Hey, I read the book." And he's like, "But it's incomplete." I'm like, "Yeah, I know. I told you." He's like, "But no, 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 you didn't finish the story." I'm like, "Yeah, I know. I told you it only goes through chapter 8. The whole book is much longer." He's like, "Okay, okay." Um, but it's so funny because like right away he was like, all I could tell from his energy like something had changed, right, from our last conversation. Now he was really locked in. And so I'm like, here, look, let me, and I pulled up the revised outline that I'm following for draft two. I said, look, here's what the whole book is going to be, right? And I walked him through like, this is everything you read so far. This is everything that's coming, and most of that, like I said, exists in some form in version one, in draft one. But I'm some it's there's some restitching that has to happen between these two drafts. That's the only reason why I don't have it ready to present to him right away. And I'm explaining all this to him, and as I'm laying out the vision for draft two, he says, I think that's two different books. I think you're actually like, I think you have two books there. And I'm like, interesting, say more. And essentially, what his perspective is that the story arc of everything that happened with my mom and everything we lived through as a family during this time is its own story. Like that is enough for a book on its own. And he's not wrong, honestly. Like even before this conversation, in fact, this was one of the biggest things I talked about with my editor when I sent her the book is that I I I was and to a lesser degree still am tempted to take that part and just isolate that and let that be the book, right? Like I'm because the other parts of the story which are still there in the outline for draft 2 have to do with my career and my writing and my other personal projects that were sort of thrown off course partially because of, well, that's the thing, right? Some of them were thrown off course, but then in some ways the structure of my career was an important pillar of sanity for me, right? Like one of the big moments that is currently in draft 1, which I haven't gotten to in draft 2 yet, is that when things first started breaking down with my mom, there's a moment where I went to my employer at the time and said, "Hey, look, um, this is the situation. I might be my schedule is going to be kind of a mess for a while." And he was like, "Oh, okay. So are you saying you need to quit?" And I was like, "No, no, 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 no." Right? Because for one thing, I I need the paycheck, but also money aside, I desperately wanted and needed that job for my sanity. Right? Like I knew that even setting aside the money issue, if I did not have that piece of my life in place, that job, which by the way, I loved. I loved that job. I loved that team. I really cared about it. Even though I was already, and again, this is part of part of the whole career arc of the book, is that for as much as I loved it, I also knew I was sort of reaching my capacity of what I could do in that role, and I was starting to look at going freelance. Now that ended up getting postponed for a year because I knew that was going to be a very difficult, destabilizing transition, and handling that while also in the thick of it with my mom was not going to serve me well. And case in point, it would not have, right? Like I can definitely say in retrospect, that was the right call because by the time I did go freelance, it was a difficult transition. It did pan out ultimately, but it was a very, very difficult process, and far greater a task than I realized going into it to leave my full time job and build myself back up to the place financially where and eventually better. Eventually, I was making even more money as a freelancer, but that took time, right? And that took a lot of um, rethinking my approach and having to learn new skills, right? It's very different having to promote yourself as a freelancer than simply being an employee. And this is what I'm saying is that everything I just described is currently in draft 1 of the book, and I think still belongs in draft 2. Because even though it doesn't directly relate to the main story with my mom, I've already mentioned how it interacts with that story on such a deep level. And it's funny because when I put this question to my editor, she said, "This all stays in one book," right? She was like, "There's some structural issues and some stylistic things to work on, but ultimately, no. That as a plot thread, that stays in the book because that too is relatable, right? It's one thing to talk about the difficulties of dealing with an addicted parent, especially as an adult when you're trying to like live your own life and build your own career. But if we only carve out that slice of the family and the addiction and everything that came with that, without talking about the domino effect that has through all the other parts of our lives, I think if I'm thinking of Sean, past Sean, right, and the kind of book he would need to read to prepare for everything he was about to face, I think I would be cheating him if I only shared this one sliver of the story. Because ultimately, what am I preparing him for if I only tell that half of it? If I only talk about um, the family dynamics and the emotional side. Which, by the way, like that, not to put that down, that's a core part of the book, right? And like, absolutely, that's something that a lot of people can relate to. Um, and I think even not everyone who reads this book is going to be a creative or someone who wants to go freelance or someone who's trying to build their own business or anything like the stuff I was doing. But they still have some sort of career, right? Like unless they're a trust fund baby. I mean, maybe for a trust fund baby that might be different, right? Although even that they'll find something to appreciate. But juggling that other sphere of our lives is something we all deal with, and it shows up differently depending on what your career path is, what field you work in, et cetera, et cetera. But to not acknowledge that piece of my own story alongside everything else, um, again feels like I'm leaving something on the table. And for someone else who is navigating these sort of choppy waters, like part of I know from experience, right? That's what I'm saying. One of the hardest parts of it is how do I show up in my career and how do I continue building my own life while this catastrophe is happening, right? Like in fact, one of my biggest fears, which comes out again and again over the course of the book, is I was so scared that this battle, this fight to protect my mom from her illness, that was going to consume my entire life. That basically I would only be her caretaker and her support system, and I would have like no identity even, much less a career, much less a way to support myself. And so uh that's why I do think that they belong in the same book, and I think it's important to be able to tell both sides of that story for anyone else um who's going through something similar, so that they can see that it's possible. It's possible. Now, granted, it's not going to be perfect, right? And nothing about my story is perfect, right? As you'll eventually see in the book, like I made all kinds of mistakes along the way, and there were all kinds of things that I could have done better. But the fact that I'm still here, I'm still standing, I've still had all these incredible things happen while this was going on is part of the story. And to play devil's advocate, or to play oh man, I wish he was on right now. To play father's advocate instead of devil's advocate. Oh, he'd love that. Um, what I told him is I'm gonna keep writing this second draft the way I've planned it out, with all these pieces in one book. And I'm gonna let you read that version, and I want you to tell me if you still think this is two separate books. And he's like, all right, fair. Because case in point, I mean, like literally everything I was just saying earlier about like the ultimate test is when you put it in front of someone, does it work, right? This is the next layer of that, right? And it's like a little bit out of order because like I gave him the partial draft and whatnot, but ultimately it's the same thing. Like, and in fact, I strongly suspect, because it's one thing to see it in the outline, right? And I think this is one of those things that um is honestly, this is like one of the things that's so great about getting an editor or an author coach or whatever else to help you with your work, is that unless you are a practitioner yourself, unless you have deep experience writing books or other forms of long form writing, it's very hard for most people to look at an outline and actually envision the finished product. Especially because, like, I mean, by definition, an outline is a form of shorthand, right? Like my outlines are, a lot of them like wouldn't make a lick of sense to an outsider because it's a set of notes that make sense in my head, right? And are sort of like there as prompts for me to remember certain things and include certain things. But if I show that to someone else, they're going to be like, they might get the general picture, but they're not going to see they're not going to see the whole picture, right? That's my job, right? That's why I'm writing the thing. And so, of course, I don't expect my dad to look at the outline and see the full vision, right? Um, Even though he's a very sharp guy and he's a great reader. And in fact, that was the last thing I want to say about that for now is um, he said something really really profound that I think is such a gift, which is that he said, "When I read your work as your father, I'm always nervous for a split second because you're my son, right? And because it's that fatherly protective instinct. He's sort of nervous for my sake, right? Like, oh, what if this isn't good? What if it doesn't work out? What if it what if it kind of blows up in his face?" And then as soon as he starts reading, he switches into reader brain and he's just reading as a reader. And he said that was the perspective he took while reading this book, which is crazy because he's in this book, right? Like he's part of these events. He's a character in the story. And yet even still, he was able to kind of separate out and be like, okay, I'm just reading this as a reader. How does it land? And by the way, I'm not saying that like that makes him like the ultimate final authority or like an ideal beta reader. I'm still gonna need beta readers that aren't in the story, right? that they're not blood relatives. But that being said, uh as a reader, he said that the book is fantastic and that I'm a great writer and yada yada. And like I've heard that before, um, but the thing that more so than what he was saying, the thing that really struck me and honestly was reinvigorating, was the fact that he was so passionately fighting, like we were like in it. We were like not coming to blows or anything, but like it got a little heated because he was so passionate about like what he thought the book should be versus what I thought the book should be. And that level of investment tells me everything I need to know. More so than what his vision is or my vision is or who's right ultimately. The fact that he's already that locked in, he's like, no, like it's got to be like this. It's like, all right, cool, because like yeah, family is family, and ultimately the fact that he has such a strong point of view on it already um tells me a lot, right? It tells me that he is investing. It's funny, like it makes me think of how so often people will become backseat writers for their favorite series, right? Or like they'll, a TV show that's like half, coming up to the finale, people frantically type up like what they think the ending is going to be or what they think the ending should be. And even though I often find that that they're wrong, frankly, like um, I generally think like the fandom usually is like sort of asking for the wrong things when it comes to a good finale. Um, what that shows is the level of investment, right? Like the fact that they in some sense want to be authors of the story is a really powerful thing. That's a good sign, right? Even if it can, come with some side effects, right? And in the form of an angry fandom, and worst case scenario, right? They start attacking the show and whatnot. But even still, that all points to the level of investment they have in the work, uh, which is a good thing. In fact, that's an essential thing if you want to build any kind of creative career. You have to be able to create that level of investment in people because if you don't, you're forgettable, which is the greatest danger of any creative career. Is that um, the input and the hype? Yeah, yep, exactly. Uh, which which brings me to back to what I was saying up top about like what I'm doing on Substack and why. And one of the things I want to highlight is the fact that like what is a memoir? Why do people read memoirs? And there's layers to that question, I think, or layers to that answer, I should say, because at the very sort of top surface level, they either directly identify with the circumstances. So in my case, people are anyone who's a survivor of addiction or maybe struggling with addiction themselves, they're going to see that in the plot synopsis and be like, okay, that's for me, right? Like I finally someone else is talking about this. Um, so that's kind of the first layer. But the layer under that, which I think is where things get really juicy. Um, yeah, well, see that is, beat me to it, Cassie. That's where we're going next. Is people read memoir to see through someone else's eyes, and I actually think this is true of basically all narrative writing. Probably, you could probably even broaden this out to like essays and persuasive writing, really. But certainly for any kind of fiction or nonfiction, um, it is fascinating and deeply human to want to see through someone else's eyes, to be able to adopt someone else's perspective on the world. And so when it comes to memoir, the product, so to speak, is that perspective. Like if someone's going to bother reading my memoir, they're getting a feast of my perspective, right? They're getting like one of the like the deepest, richest, most complete versions of it I have to offer because it's a book, right? But in terms of building an audience for that, this is one of those things that I I've worked in marketing for 10 years, right? I understand marketing and I know how marketing works in a lot of different contexts. And I also know that marketing is one of those fields where people have a really bad habit of saying, this worked over here, and therefore it's going to work everywhere in every context for every business and every product ever. And that's not true, right? Like I can show you countless examples of where that falls apart. And when it comes to book marketing, one of the things I've been really sitting with is the way that business authors tend to market books or want them to be marketed is very much like it's funny. I actually there's this guy this is someone I really respect, really sharp dude. His name's Maurice, and he works with business authors in terms like basically helps them with the publishing side. And exactly, application is not meant to be copied into every scenario. So this guy, and he is a book lover himself, very well read, very sharp dude. And yet even he, at one point he said to me, books are a commodity, right? Books are a commodity, especially in that vertical. The thing that's not a commodity is authority, positioning, thought leadership, like all the things that the book transmits, assuming it's done well and assuming it's marketed well. That's the thing that people really want as a business author. And he's completely right. Right. And even he, I think, would agree that that's not to say that the book doesn't matter or that it doesn't matter how you write the book. His point is that those are the things you need to think about and write the book towards, and then make sure you build a marketing engine that supports that. And so when it comes to a book like mine, which I think I might have mentioned this last week, but originally it was going to be more of a hybrid between a sort of business book to position my ghostwriting services and then also this memoir piece. Now it is entirely memoir. So given the book that I'm actually writing, right, at some point I had to stop and reassess, like, all right, how do I promote this? How do I build an audience for this? And the thing that I came down to is like, well, I'm inviting people to have a meal of my perspective. And so what are the breadcrumbs, right, to lead into that meal? It's more of my perspective, right? It's really that simple. And I think this is where a lot of book marketers would drop the ball, is that they would look at what I'm writing and assume, oh, this is a book about, grief, loss, addiction, et cetera, all these like high level topics, which yes, that is what it is. And they seem like, oh, well then how about, you write articles about grief and about surviving addicted family members and all these things. And like those topics will come up for obvious reasons, right? But I'm not sitting here thinking like, okay, what are the keywords for someone dealing with grief? What are the keywords for someone who is, dealing with an addicted family member? Because that's an audience, but that's not the whole audience. That's not the only audience. Like, yeah, right. Actually better knowledge around, and see, that's the thing, right? Is like here I am on this live talking about that piece, right? And like I do have like in my running list of Substack articles, I will have articles that talk about some of that stuff directly, because it's funny actually. Quick sidebar on this. It's worth going down this rabbit hole. So, one of my absolute biggest childhood heroes was Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller. Really, I could count both of them because they're a magician duo. But Penn and Teller, I first they had a show on Showtime called Bullshit, which is amazing. They would basically take different topics and debunk them. Yeah, exactly. It's part of my story, so why not? Really, that could be the whole of it, right? But the thing I love about Penn and Teller is that their whole bit is they'll do a magic trick and then they'll take you inside the trick. They'll basically, like the one thing that most magicians never do, they will expose how the trick works and explain it and walk through. Here's how it works, right? Here's what we're doing, right? It's magic spoiled. But the brilliance of it is that, and a lot of this comes down to both their technical skill, because between the two of them, it is kind of like Mythbusters, actually, yeah, which I also loved as a kid. Between the two of them, like Teller, so like whenever you watch them on stage, Penn does all the talking, and Penn's this like massive dude. He used to be like a lot more overweight too. It's like big guy, big huge hair, kind of like this. Um, and then Teller's this like much shorter. I think he literally was like a teacher before he got into magic. So he's got this like very small, kind of mild mannered guy, and and so Penn's doing all the talking. He's this big, boisterous personality, and then Teller is usually the one actually performing most of the trick. And that actually mirrors how they work backstage too, because and Penn has fully admitted this in his own writings. Penn's a fine magician. Teller is like once in a lifetime like virtuosic magician. Um, I get it's funny. I always thought that was the bit, right? That like they literally named themselves Penn and Teller for that reason, but no, that's literally their names. Yeah, they're literally now Penn is two N's because it's Penn Penn. But yeah, Penn and Teller, right? Um, and so right, exactly. Yeah. Um, so Teller's like this master at crafting magic tricks. I mean, he's got this like unbelievable talent for like breaking down a bit, figuring out how it works, figuring out how to make it cool on stage. Um, and then Teller is this brilliant, brilliant writer and philosopher, and like the way they do their shows. And they did the same thing because like even on that show bullshit they would have like them doing magic tricks on set in between the like interview segments and whatever else. But he's really, I mean, Penn is like really at his core, he's an essayist. And he'll take an idea and like it's like, okay, how can we make this visual and have the magic trick be a visual metaphor for this idea I'm breaking down, but also he has just got this amazing way with words and structures, and like he can like weave a story through these all these different ideas. and and so getting why, I mean, it should be obvious by now why I like was just hook line and sinker for these dudes as a kid. Like I mean, I just devoured everything I could get my hands on. And the thing that stuck with me is that core idea that it's one thing to do a magic trick and to do a great magic trick that the crowd loves and gets the response you're hoping for. But if you can explain how you did it and quote unquote spoil the trick and it's still a great show, that's a whole different level. And that's what I loved about Penn and Teller is that they can do the trick. They're masters of doing the trick, and they can take you inside the trick and subvert it and still make for a great show and still and make something even better than the trick itself. And also one of the really cool things, because like I actually got to see them live once in Vegas, which was incredible. And there was one trick I remember where um, they had this like rolling background screen, right? It showed this like little farm scene, and they bring up an audience member from the stage, and they're having him do Penn's doing his talking, he's doing his patter, and this whole monologue about like basically explaining how like human perception works, and like yeah, here's the different tricks we're pulling on stage right now, and here's why you're missing them, and they're doing stuff like um they're like making his plate disappear from under him when he tries to take a bite, right? Because they're doing this sort of picnic scene, and it's all like kind of fun, goofy stuff, and like it's a sort of classic formula. They're showing you the bit as they do it, but then right at the end, and to this day, I could not even fathom a guess as to how they did this. Um, Penn just goes, and now he's Teller, and all of a sudden, that audience member they invited on stage just like it's not like they like pulled a curtain and it's like you blink and all of a sudden Teller is sitting there, and it's like, wait, what? Right? And that's the thing, because sometimes like even as they're explaining the bit, they'll do a new bit and a new trick that they don't explain. Right? And then you're sitting there reeling. So um all that to say, I think like that's what's so fun about that approach is that there's always another layer down, right? And you can decide how deep you want to go and when you want to stop. And so bringing back around to the main topic with this Substack and with my work in general, I have always felt that tug to be like, okay, I'm going to do the thing, but I also want to explain how I'm doing the thing. And case in point, yeah, and there is a time and place, right? Like like I said, this is not something I necessarily recommend or even put into practice every single time. And it is an onion, like an ogre. Um, I love Shrek. Oh man, um, we really are the same age, aren't we, Cassie? But anyway, so so uh with the book, like that was one of the things my editor pointed out is like you're doing a lot of sort of scaffolding here. Like you're sort of like stepping outside and explaining the story. You don't need to do that, right? For a story like this, you can just tell the story. And I was like, all right, point taken. And that's one of the biggest things is it's changing between draft one and two. Um, ultimately, uh, but when it comes to something like this, right? This is me building a body of work. This is like each Substack article is its own piece, and I can sort of set its own rules. But part of the beauty of having an ongoing stream like this is that I do get to experiment, and I can and you'll see like I'm gonna do a lot of different things here. Like I'm gonna do things that are more your kind of classic self-help article ish. I'll never go. I'm not gonna go full Mark Manson or anything, but you'll see things that kind of have that vibe. Others are just straight up stories, like just telling a great story. That's it. And then some are somewhere in between, right? And then some are like going to be like essays and meta commentary and reflections on other things I've read. Because again, that's where most traditional marketers would step in and say like, well, you should just keep it focused on the topic of the book. And I'm like, no, 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 no. All of those things are samples of my perspective, even if like not every single one of them will be a direct reflection of what it's like to read the book, but they're all my perspective, right? And I think that is the key to everything, right? Like when I think of my my sort of Mount Rushmore of authors that have had the biggest influence on me, they do ultimately settle into a kind of house style, right? Like they exactly. Oh, I love that. Never put yourself on one shelf when the library has room to be filled. That's a good one. You gotta quote that one, Cassie. You gotta put that in a note. um, but ultimately the the point is not to like pigeonhole myself because ultimately like I don't know that the kind of reader that's most going to enjoy this book would even find that all that interesting, right? Like um to just come back and hear me yap about the same handful of topics over and over and over again. um I think frankly they would probably get bored of that too. I know I would. Right. um and honestly when I see other people doing that in their content, like I kind of just dart in and out, right? I don't those are not the people I follow religiously and consume every single thing they put out. If all they're doing is like hammering away at one topic forever, I get bored. Um, and it's funny, it's so I'm a big fan of like YouTube video essays. So people like Jacob Geller, Super Eye Patch Wolf, folks like that. And what those all the people that are sort of in that pantheon for me, the thing they've all achieved is that I literally do not care what topic the video is going to be on. I know that because they're the one making the video, it's worth watching and I'm going to have a great time because I'm hooked. I'm friggin' addicted to their perspective. I don't even care what the perspective is on. I care that the perspective is coming from them. And I think that is the effect that is worth creating consciously because it doesn't happen by accident. Like that's the thing that I think is hard to see if you're coming from a traditional business perspective and only thinking of things in like 90-day windows, because no, it is not the fastest way to monetize an audience, right? It's not. It is faster in the short term to go narrow and deep in one topic at a time. But if you're trying to build the kind of career where you can just talk about whatever you want to talk about and people will come and listen, that has to be something you think about from the beginning. And the more you can demonstrate that breadth and that depth at the same time to show like, look, anything I talk about is going to be interesting and worth your time, then you buy the right to go anywhere and talk about whatever, right? And it's funny because even as I say that, like I still have my core themes, right? Like you will see there's certain things I come back to over and over again, but it's not because I like am cynically trying to manipulate the market with like here's what the hot topics are. It's like no, these are the things that like are eternally relevant to me and to others, right? Because if there's something that you've been obsessing over for most of your life, chances are there's at least one other person out there that's also been obsessing over it for their whole life. In fact, there's probably quite a few of them. Uh, and so that's part of the work is finding those people and bringing them together so that you can all revel in that thing and converting newcomers. That's where I am more in the sense of connecting with others who might feel alone. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and somebody asked me this week, like, what's the through line for what you do? Because we were talking about this is my good buddy Dean, who I might try to get on one of these lives at this point. He's a really interesting guy. And we were chatting about Pokemon exactly. We were chatting about just the like what it takes to build a successful entrepreneur, which comes before building a successful business. In fact, that's like one of the core ideas we were talking about is like the way you build better businesses is that you build better entrepreneurs. And he is like a living example of that because he has like worked in a crazy like he at one point was like worked in like distribution for I forget which company, but like in like beer, right? Like he was in the alcohol industry. And like he at one point like started a cannabis farm. Or no, he didn't start a cannabis farm. He built a security company with another dude for cannabis farms, right? So this is like right as legalization was starting to pick up, and like these were legit farms that had that the farms those were totally legal, but they had to protect against people raiding them. And so he literally like had a friend who was I want to say ex-Navy, but they built this security company together, and then that friend tragically passed away in a motorcycle wreck. And so um, Dean basically just handed the entire business. I think they might have like sold it. I forget exactly what they did, but basically didn't take a penny out of it after that point. He gave it everything to the family to help support them. Um, and so just a good dude. He's lived this crazy interesting life, done a bunch of different things. Um, and currently for longest has also been a gym owner. And he was saying like, yeah, dude, like I've done a lot of reflection on this, and with all these different things I've done, the thing I always come back to is that I like to see people happy, right? That's it. Like how can I make people happy? And I was like, mine's kind of similar, but it's both but here's the twist is that I look for a moment where somebody sees more color in the world than they did before. And I know like the reason why that's so important to me is that when I was in my teens, there's a point where I didn't, right? There's a point where I was in a really dark place. And there were stages and levels to me seeing color in the world where I previously did not. And a lot of that came from what I was reading and even the video games I was playing, the music I would listen to, and crucially, the conversations around those things, finding other people who love those things and talking at great depth about these things that we loved. That's what pulled me out of that darkness and layer by layer by layer built me into the confident young man that was actually able to get into a good school and go have a awesome career and do all the things I've done since then. But it all comes back to that moment where oh, there's more out there than I thought there was, right? Or even the things I'm already seeing in my own day to day. Subsecond, why do you think I'm here, right? Like that's exactly what this platform is for. And that's the thing is that I think the for me one of the biggest challenges has been me devaluing that, right? Putting that in a box and saying like, "Oh, that's just this like cute little bonus thing that happens off here in the nooks and crannies of my life," right? But it's not serious business. It's not real business. And one of the things I've been like unlearning for a while now is that is insanely valuable. And people like I don't need to convince anyone of that. People already crave that and seek that and go looking for it. And so my job is to make sure that when they go looking for it, I'm where they can find me, right? Like, um, which again I think is something we all deal with as creatives is that it's so tempting because the truth is like there there is a genuine hostility in the world towards creative people and creative thinking. There always has been, there always will be. Um, and it can be very tempting to look at that and want to turn combative and say, no, I have to convince those people. I need to convince them that what I'm saying is valuable and why and like I should be devoting my life to the arts and I should be, spending all this time with books and I should, right? All this stuff that ultimately comes from a place of insecurity because you're some part of you is scared that they're right. That all these people saying that, the arts don't matter, they it's fine for artists to be underpaid and have to do other things to support themselves like all of that. I mean, for one, there's a lot of reasons that that's there, but ultimately, the more you focus on it, the more you're going to get off track because at the end of the day, our greatest power lies in our ability to find the people that already get the joke and bring them together. And then this is the crucial part. This is how it's possible to actually grow a career rather than get stuck um, in a become a big fish in a small pond, which I've done. Right, I've been a big fish in many ponds. Um, is once you have those people that get the joke, once they have the lights coming on in their eyes, and everyone's grooving and having an awesome time, you need to find a way to amplify that and make sure other people can see there's a party over there, right? Whatever those people are doing, like I don't even get it, right? I from afar I might be totally confused and befuddled, but I better take a closer look because man, they seem to really be having a great time. And again, you can think of like any fandom that you're a part of, right? Like anything that you love and have spent a lot of time with, like you probably had that similar arc where um at first it was just that thing off in the distance. You maybe had heard about it and heard rumors about it, right? Or saw people talking about it at a distance. But all it took was either like the curiosity got so intense that you had to check it out, or you had a fan grab you and pull you in, like, oh, you gotta come check this out. You gotta come take a close look at this. I'm begging you, right? And that effect comes from finding the right people and activating them and pumping them so full of the light in their eyes, the color, that they have to turn around and share it. That they feel a moral obligation to turn around and share it. Which, by the way, so do I. Like that's what has driven me this whole time. Is not just that I've had people turn the lights on for me in so many different ways, right? And that includes authors who died, hundreds of years before I was born. That includes people I've worked with directly in my own life. But ultimately, all of it is part of the same process, and I feel an obligation to pass that gift along to others. Um, Cassie says it's all about control and the creative people broken free from internal challenges. Internal, yeah, exactly, yeah, and yeah, and it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing battle, right? Like the those same forces will fight harder and harder the more successful you become as a creative, right? One of my biggest influences is Kurt Vonnegut, and he, I mean, he in his own lifetime had people banning his books, And there's a if you ever get the chance to go out to Indianapolis and go to the Kurt Vonnegut Museum, I highly recommend it. It's not that big. You can knock it out in like maybe 2 to 3 hours. But one of the things that struck me when I went out, this was maybe I don't know 3 or 4 years ago. There is a because they have a banned book library, right? Because a lot of his books were banned in his own time, and so they keep a library of anytime a book is banned, right? Which is increasingly common these days. They stock it to make sure that hey, here's a place where someone can find it and read it. I've written a little bit. Yeah. Let me just finish the thought with Vonnegut. So with that banned book library, they have a letter that oh perfect. Ooh, cool. Yeah, I mean if you make it over to Indianapolis, do it. There's a letter that he wrote to I want to say it was like a state senator somewhere, or some other politician that was like calling for his books to be banned. And in that, in fact, you know what? Let me see if I can find it. Because this, I think, would be a fantastic note to end on before we wrap up today. To Drake School Board. Yeah. Okay. In fact, let me go ahead and screen share this in case anyone would like to follow along. Here we go. Okay. So since it's first being published in 1967, despite being considered one of the great modern novels. So this is for Slaughterhouse-Five. Often described by those who censor it as obscene content. There was a teacher who tried to use it in class. The dean of the school, or the head of the school board, demanded that the copies be burned in the school furnace. Many of the students protested the decision. Some even refused to hand their books back. Their admirable stance was ignored. All right, here we go. On November 16th, 1973, an angry and disappointed Kurt Vonnegut wrote to McCarthy to make his feelings known. His powerful letter failed to generate a reply. Hang on a second. Do I have screen share still? Okay, cool. Screen share is working. All right. Dear Mr. McCarthy, I'm writing to you in your capacity as chairman of the Drake School Board. I am among those American writers whose books have been destroyed in the now famous furnace of your school. Certain members of your community have suggested that my work is evil. This is extraordinarily insulting to me. The news from Drake indicates to me that books and writers are very unreal to you people. I'm writing this letter to let you know how real I am. I want you to know, too, that my publisher and I have done absolutely nothing to exploit the disgusting news from Drake. We're not clapping each other on the back, crowing about all the books we will sell because of the news. We have declined to go on television, have written no fiery letters to editorial pages, have granted no lengthy interviews. We are angered and sickened and saddened, and no copies of this letter have been sent to anybody else. You now hold the only copy in your hands. It is a strictly private letter from me to the people of Drake, who have done so much to damage my reputation in the eyes of their children and then in the eyes of the world. Do you have the courage and ordinary decency to show this letter to the people, or will it too be consigned to the fires of your furnace? I gather from what I read in the papers and hear on television that you imagine me and some other writers too as being sort of rat-like people who enjoy making money from poisoning the minds of young people. I am, in fact, a large, strong person, 51 years old, who did a lot of farm work as a boy, who is good with tools. I've raised 6 children, 3 of my own and 3 adopted. They have all turned out well. 2 of them are farmers. I am a combat infantry veteran from World War II and hold a Purple Heart. I have earned whatever I own by hard work. I have never been arrested or sued for anything. I am so much trusted with young people and by young people that I have served on the faculties of the University of Iowa, Harvard, and the City College of New York. Every year I receive at least a dozen invitations to be a commencement speaker at colleges and high schools. My books are probably more widely used in schools than those of any other living American fiction writer. If you were to bother to read my books, to behave as educated persons would, you would learn that they are not sexy and do not argue in favor of wildness of any kind. They beg that people be kinder and more responsible than they often are. It is true that some of the characters speak coarsely. That is because people speak coarsely in real life. Especially soldiers and hardworking men speak coarsely. And even our most sheltered children know that. And we all know, too, that those words don't really damage children much. They didn't damage us when we were young. It was evil deeds and lying that hurt us. After I have said all this, I am sure you are still ready to respond, in effect, yes, yes, but it still remains our right and our responsibility to decide what books our children are going to be made to read in our community. This is surely so. But it is also true that if you exercise that right and fulfill that responsibility in an ignorant, harsh, un American manner, then people are entitled to call you bad citizens and fools. Even your own children are entitled to call you that. I read in the newspaper that your community is mystified by the outcry from all over the country about what you have done. Well, you have discovered that Drake is a part of American civilization, and your fellow Americans can't stand it that you have behaved in such an uncivilized way. Perhaps you will learn from this that books are sacred to free men for very good reasons, and that wars have been fought against nations which hate books and burn them. If you are an American, you must allow all ideas to circulate freely in your community, not merely your own. If you and your board are now determined to show that you, in fact, have wisdom and maturity when you exercise your powers over the education of our young, then you should acknowledge that it was a rotten lesson you taught young people in a free society when you denounced and then burned books you hadn't even read. You should also resolve to expose your children to all sorts of opinions and information in order that they will be better equipped to make decisions and to survive. Again, you have insulted me, and I am a good citizen, and I am very real. Kurt Vonnegut. Whew! Damn. Ah, I love that letter so much. And what, is there not a certain irony in that now being public, right? Like, I do think it's interesting that that is publicly available now, and that's proudly displayed by the library, with good reason. Uh, and yet, I also respect his decision to keep that letter private in its initial form, um, because, like he says, the real fight is not to convince the people that don't get it. The real fight is to make sure that the people who do have the chance to get more of it. And everything does come to light in time. Absolutely. So, thanks again, Cassie, in particular, for joining me today. I'll be back next week, maybe with a new name figured out, maybe not. We'll see. I do not know yet. But this has been a joy. And I hope to see you and more next week. Have a good one.